right, everybody. This is going to be a great conversation today. My name is Karen Edwards. Thank you for being here. This coffee conversation brought to you by Metal Coffee Shop and today's sponsor, Metal Forming. Thank you very much, Metal Forming. It's going to be a conversation all about the future of folding. And we mean folding metal, of course. And we have the expert here with us today to have this conversation. Before I introduce him, though, I want to just remind everybody that the chat is open. Feel free to share where you're watching from, what part of the country you're in, and drop those questions because we want this to be a conversation throughout this time. And if you have questions, put them out there or use the Q&A button. We want to help you, we want to educate, and we want to help you find success in this area. So let's get started. David Prokop from Metal Forming, welcome to the coffee conversation. I would love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background. You've got a great story.
Well, good morning, Karen. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I started in this industry after graduating with a industrial engineering degree as a service technician, and worked for a company that imported some of the brand new, very high-tech bending solutions coming in from Europe, and got really frustrated going in to do installations and work with customers on bringing in some of this new technology and having to deal with a great level of frustration with customers where they had been missold. The machines weren't properly represented, and they were struggling to make the adaptation from what they had previously been using, oftentimes mechanical brakes and other mechanical bending methods, into the newer hydraulic CNC controlled bending solutions. So I kind of decided that the only way to get out of that situation was to go into sales and be able to control what was being told the customer versus having to deal with it. And went into sales, and for the first several years was very involved in the adaptation where lasers were coming into the fabricating industry, getting very heavily into the software and the automation side of it. And then one of the shows in Europe, I came upon folding, and I absolutely fell head over heels in love with it, having dealt so much with bending technologies in the past and certainly understanding the struggles and kind of shaking my head sometimes at how these other bending methods are reigning supreme. I attacked the folding industry with a vengeance. And for the last 30 some years of my career, I've been focused very heavily on the folding technology and introducing it to customers. And, it's kind of an interesting time right now where there's so many different needs that customers have that are kind of converging in one spot and really starting to direct them very, very rapidly and precisely to folding. It's nothing that in my 40+ year career I've actually ever seen in any technology before, where there's so many things impacting industry that's forcing people to go elsewhere, and more often than not, they're landing on folding. So it's a very, very exciting time.
Okay, so I'm gonna turn off the PowerPoint here. We'll just have a conversation. I'm gonna ask you a very rookie question because you mentioned bending, and then you mentioned folding, and you fell in love with folding. So in my mind, I'm like, well, aren't they the same thing? Can you talk a little bit about what the difference is?
So, there's a number of different ways of bending a part, right? And everyone's familiar with the traditional box and pan brakes or leaf brakes, right? And technically, a box and pan brake is a manual folder, right? It folds the metal by clamping it between two tools and then having another tool that rotates up and drives that flange to a particular angle. Obviously, with someone on the other end, doing this all day long. A lot of people in the early days were also using press brakes. And most people in this industry are very familiar with the roto die, which was a very, very popular bending solution where you have a tool that moves vertically and drives the piece of metal into another tool, a die, into a predetermined depth, and that's what creates the angle, right? So be it a press brake or a folder, whether it's a manual folder, box and pan brake, or a mechanical electrical folder, those are the two main means of bending. Then you get further on into the automation end of the world, and you get into panel benders, which are typically, used for many big, flat, high precision sheets where you're kicking out tens of thousands of similar product. And then you also then slide into the long folder, which bends the similar way that a traditional folder would, but because it's constructed with C frames and not side frames, you pretty much have an unlimited length that you can build those out to. We have folders out in North America that are up near 60 feet in length for bending long trim pieces and things that would mount up to the metal building sides, and vertical, horizontal wall panels, things of that nature. So, each method of bend carries with it a certain amount of labor that needs to be put into that process, right? And today, one of the biggest challenges that everyone faces, and I've never had anyone say that's not the case for them, it is labor. I mean, labor is driving a big part of where people are heading in today's industry, and with manufacturing so incredibly busy right now. It's a problem that frankly is not going away, and the only cure for it is to introduce different levels of technology that can offset that loss of labor.
Right. It's funny because 20 years ago, right, new technologies coming out, and we're even hearing a little bit of the same with AI today. Oh, technology is going to take my job, or technology, but it's really not. It's
Mm-mm.
allowing you to do more with
Correct.
fewer bodies, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah. So I'm curious how most contractors get started. Are they going down that manual line and then realizing, wow, I could be more efficient with technology and automation? Or are you seeing more contractors ready to kind of take that plunge into technology right away?
So it kind of depends on what their end goal is, right? So if you are primarily an installer, and you're kind of tired of paying someone else to bend up your flashing and trim and gutters and everything else, traditionally they'll get in with a fairly basic folder and shear. And frankly, it's one of the lowest cost introductions into manufacturing you can get is a little break and a shear, a 10-foot 16 gauge folder and a little 10-foot 16 gauge shear, and you're a manufacturer. You're making product, right? You're making the margin for yourself versus paying someone else that margin and running out and installing it. A lot of the larger companies that have already transitioned into the motorized folding and shearing, right, where the production requirements are really getting ahead of their ability to backfill with labor, they start looking very, very heavily into automation. It's a big jump to go from, and I'll start from the basics, from a box and pan brake or a leaf brake to an automated folder. That's a
Mhm.
big, big transition. And it also kind of depends on what you're making, right? Roofing profiles, which are typically 12-foot or less, are very different than metal building profiles that often are 20-foot in length because they're trying to cover up the side of a 500-foot long building. So those two really also come into a very, very different position in terms of what someone might want to do with automation because of the part size.
Right. Yeah. And then I imagine the amount of space you have in your shop is going to be a factor too,
Of
right?
course. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, whether
Yeah.
you're bringing in flat sheet, with most people do, or whether you're starting the transition to bring in some pony coils, some smaller coils, and actually start processing that flat sheet for your own uses. Yeah, floor space can be a problem, right? I mean, you got to have room for the sheet. You got to have room to safely maneuver those big profiles around the machines that you're running. You don't want to be hitting the person behind you in the back of the skull when you're helicoptering a gutter over your head to make that next bend. So
Yeah.
you do have to have that, a proper platform in place to install these machines and to, bend the product in.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of consideration that goes into it. It's not just buying a machine, right?
Correct.
It's figuring out all the logistics and all that stuff. But that's one of the things that your team is really good at in a
Correct.
consultative type.
Yep.
You got frustrated seeing what customers were experiencing, so you decided to kind of, you said go into sales, but it's really consultative sales.
It is consultative sales. One of the, I tell people regularly, I have a very, very strong, and everyone here has a very, very strong self-preservation skill set where we make darn sure our customers don't go down a rabbit hole and buy the wrong piece of equipment or don't get it installed properly or aren't trained properly, right? If we
Hmm.
can prevent those things from the get-go, we can save everyone a whole lot of headaches and effort. And the big thing is to be able to move into some new production capabilities without having those missteps and miscues. There's more to implementing this technology, particularly as it becomes more and more automated, than just buying a machine, bolting it to the concrete, and throwing an operator in front of it, right? And a lot of it really does revolve around safety, as we're putting lower and lower skill level people in front of these machines that haven't 15, 20, 30 years worth of bending experience, you have to protect them from the operation. And then you get into the scenarios of the, protection systems and how much does that impede the production coming off of that machine. So that integration and interface between the safety aspects of the machine, how the machine operates, the people running it, the training, the installation, right, the advice given is huge to ultimately having a successful example of a good fabricating facility that's been built up from stage one. So
Yeah, I imagine that the just getting started, the manual versions, you really do have to have a lot of skill to get it right.
you do.
Um,
And
because
patience.
yeah,
A lot of skill and patience.
because you want it to be consistent and
Right.
the quality every time. But if you're just getting started in that, that's pretty hard to do.
That's very, very hard to do. And what happens is then that compromises the rest of that process. So you can, prick punch the sides of a sheet, put it through a leaf break, load it into a box, put it on a truck, send it off to the building to be installed. And then the person at the site realizes that not one piece meshes with the other. And they spend most of their time fitting versus installing. And where people don't have labor on the front side of the operation, right? They don't have labor on the back side either. It's as difficult finding people that want to go hang trim as it is to find people that want to bend it. So anything you can do, that was one of the more interesting things that I found with bending is really the only process that sets the stage for everything that happens thereafter, right? It determines how efficient the rest of your process is. If there was no assembly, if you're making a bucket, accuracy doesn't matter. It can't leak, right?
Right.
But the second multiple parts have to go and connect with other multiple parts, accuracy starts to matter, right? So the more accurate that product can be, and I hear all the time, it's like, we don't need to make, parts that are within thousandths of an inch, right? We're just trying to gutter away water from the side of a roof. It's like, yeah, but how cool would it be if those two gutters could slide together perfectly, right, in a lap joint, or they fit so effortlessly that you can run a complete row of parts without even thinking about it, where you can put panels up on the outside of a building and you don't have to custom make the last panel because of a buildup of intolerances. How much more efficient would that installation be if you could have everything that fits? So where you may not need to pull 2/1000ths of an inch accuracy on an overall part size, the more accurate that part is, the faster it will install and the more efficiency you have in downstream operations, which relate directly to less labor and input and cost.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. It may seem like a big undertaking to move into automation, but it really sounds like the benefits and the gains are gonna outweigh any pain points. And that's what you've been doing this for years, you're there to help.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah. And, and automation isn't for everyone.
Hmm.
And, automation isn't necessarily faster and it isn't necessarily more flexible. But once most companies get to a certain size, automation almost, especially in today's world, becomes a necessity, right?
Hmm.
And one of the biggest discussions that we always start with when we get the phone call, hey, I want to buy a folder, it needs to be as automated as possible, right? Well, okay, well, what do you mean by automation? Because we can give
Yeah.
you one that's as automated as possible if have the urge to stroke a $5 million check. But oftentimes that level of automation isn't required, right? And it certainly isn't required from the get-go, but getting into a system that could possibly give you a stepping stone path that you can slowly move into automation or get into more semi-automation, right? Where the operator isn't quite as tied to the machine and can be doing other things while the machine is doing what it does. There's a number of different paths you can take, right? And frankly, from a technology stance, just on a standalone folder, there's a number of different levels that are available in industry that have widely varying output and capacities. So, looking at a system that's highly safeguarded, so the operator has got the safest interface to that machine as possible because they're, not at a point yet where they really respect what that thing can do to a finger.
Oof,
And
yeah.
having that safety interface be one that increases the output of a machine, I mean, that's just the absolute perfect solution. And those solutions do exist. So, automation is oftentimes a coin phrase that everyone wants to throw out there. But the first question is, okay, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
right? What do you truly mean by automation?
And what are you trying to do? Right? Is a key part of that. If you're just bending metal trim or, like what are those things that you are doing and where do you want to grow? So it sounds like you're saying there are solutions that can get you started that can
Hmm.
then scale with your business.
Correct. Absolutely. Yeah, because not everyone, well, frankly, I mean, the dollar, right? What people can afford is always a touchy subject, but it has to be had. That conversation point has to be had. Not everyone can afford a fully automated system. Not everyone has the ability to write a 500,000 or a $2 million check. They just don't. So starting with a solution that can get you going into a basis that you can grow upon and add automation as it makes sense, either from a financial stance or from a production stance, is absolutely critical. You don't ever want to get into a solution that gives you a dead end where you can't go further than that, right? Because then in 5 years, if you want to go into automation, you have to start all over again and buy what you bought 5 years earlier again in order to truly get into automation. And then the understanding of what a company means by automation, right? I see a lot of people talking automation that truly isn't, where you still have to
Mm,
have someone involved to do certain parts of that profile. That's semi automation, it's not automation. So, how flexible is that automated system, right?
yeah,
So there's
interesting.
it's a big discussion, and it can often be an uncomfortable one because you're almost challenging what someone has said that they want, but you have to have that open forum to have those discussions to prevent someone from ending up in a bad spot that frankly at the end of the day they end up kind of being stuck with it. So one of the big things that we charge all of our outside sales agents with is to really have that discussion and understand what they mean, present what the different options are, and make sure that there's clarity in terms of what's really going on out there. And unfortunately, not everybody does that, you
Wow.
know.
Yeah, and then you could be making a purchase or an investment that, like you said, 5 years later, it's not any good. So
Correct.
let's talk a little bit more about that semi-automation versus full automation. So in my mind, I was thinking you've got this technology, this automation, but somebody still has to watch it or feed it or turn it around or are there solutions that do everything?
Yeah, there are, and all of the above, from your beginning statement to your last one. So let's start with the basic machine, CNC controlled folder. An operator is in charge of that part in terms of inserting it into the machine, hitting the gauge points, hitting the pedal, making the bend. The gauge progresses the part to the next gauge point, makes the bend. If the part needs to be flipped, it's a manual flip. If it has to be rotated, it's a manual rotation, right? So the operator is fully engaged in that process and they truly control the production coming off of that machine. You can have a machine that's faster and slower, but the operator is who's actually cadencing that product and that production coming off of that. The next level you would have then would be a folder that bends both up and down. So you no longer need to flip the part for a reverse bend. Those machines typically have grippers that grip the back side of the part and feed it forward through each bend as it goes up and down. Now, that is going to be manually loaded. The gripper grabs the flat, makes the bends. At some point in that bending process, the operator is going to need to rotate the part, reinsert it to bend the other side. Most of the time, you can't grip a part and feed it all the way through until it's done, especially as a lot of parts have hems on each sides, right? So there you're going to have someone that gets involved and is watching it and is ready to rotate that part. Now, if it's a 5 foot part, that's not a problem. If it's a 20 foot or a 26 or a 33 foot part, that becomes problematic. Now you
Right.
have two people, maybe three people helping to do that. Then you get into automatic infeed systems where it can automatically bring the flat into the machine, grip it, make the bending. The operator still needs to do some rotation. Maybe if there's an external hem, they need to pull the part out and push the part back into the machine to close that external hem. Then you get into these big overhead robotic systems that can fully automate and manipulate, even hold the part to reinsert it for external hems. So you've got all these different, levels of automation that you can get into. I consider anything that doesn't allow the system to 100% complete your product as a semi-automated solution,
Okay.
right? When I go out there and talk to customers, I try to define what words mean. because it's very, very important to me for everyone to be on the same page, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's why I wanted you to have this conversation right now
Right,
about semi
right.
versus fully.
And there's the other thing that I work a lot with customers is writing a good sales agreement, right? Anything someone tells you, they should be willing to put in writing and guarantee 100% of that machine comes out. So if someone's sitting there saying, hey, fully automated, what does that mean? Right? Here are the parts I need to run. Can I run all of these without anyone touching a thing from blank to setting down that finished part? Right? And get those things confirmed. Because oftentimes, and you hate to say it, but oftentimes the salesperson that you're dealing with, they may not know either. They're
Yeah.
excited about getting this big order, right? And they're yes, 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 right? They don't want to say no. But sometimes the no is the most important word to say when you're dealing with a customer on a big investment that has to work. And if you don't give the no's where they need to be given, then you're going to end up with a problem. And those were the problems that got me out of service and got me
Right.
into got me into sales. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally makes sense that, you were seeing all these customers being let down and disappointed,
mhm,
and it's doing the right thing, and education is a huge part of the process.
huge. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you look at it, the people that are engaging salesmen, sales reps, sales agents, whatever you want to call them, to buy this equipment. Oftentimes, they've never bought a piece of equipment like this before in their lives. This is the first go around for them. They oftentimes don't know what to ask.
Right.
And, there's a certain pride to not wanting to acknowledge the fact that, hey, I don't know what to ask. I don't know what to look for. I don't know what to compare. And one of the earliest things I really think that would benefit most very, very highly is to try to discern between the reps that are in it for their benefit versus in it for their own benefit, right? A good rep will say, I have nothing for you. This isn't the right decision to make with my equipment. You should call this person.
Yeah.
That's a good rep because not everyone can supply everyone's needs with everything, right?
Yeah.
So trying to determine who's actually in it for the benefit of the customer they're selling to versus for the benefit of them getting an order is critical to having that good tight relationship. And then you also get into these discussions which too frequently aren't had as it relates to service and support,
Oh
right? The
yeah.
more automated that machine becomes, the more uptime it has to have.
Right.
If you've got a person in front of a machine and it's only producing parts 30% of the day and it goes down for 2 days, fine, you lose 2 days of 30% production. If it's automated and it's running 24 hours a day and it goes down for 2 days, you can't make up that time.
No.
So, what does the support look like? What are the remote support capabilities? What's the part availability? Excuse me. What is the training that'll be provided in terms of the maintenance staff so that they're more, capable of helping assist in determining what a down, what's causing that machine to go down, what part may have failed. That is as big of a conversation as making the right machine selection, because you can buy the best darn machine out there, and if you can't keep it up and running, it's worthless. It's
Right.
critical.
So are some of these machines connected to the web? Because you said the word remote support.
Right.
If you get a computer support, you get a tech and they give you a place to go and they can log into your computer and see what's happening. Do these machines offer capabilities like that?
Most of them do. Some offer some incredibly high levels of capabilities. Others offer less. That's one of the things that should be very looked at a very, very high level when analyzing what service capabilities and response times are. Look, we'd all love to be able to put a technician on everyone's floor within an hour, right?
Oh
You
yeah.
just can't. It's not possible. And for any company to staff up enough service technicians to do that, you wouldn't be able to afford the equipment. So it's a balancing act between being able to quickly respond, being able to have internal support mechanisms on the phone, right, with technicians that can talk and immediately try to start supporting you in terms of what your need is. Typically 2 to 3 days, right, is oftentimes fairly realistic in terms of getting some sort of a response. But if you're able to get most of that diagnostics done up front, where you're dealing with it remotely, where the machine is able to also do a certain extent of diagnosing itself, where it says,
Right.
hey, this is what the problem product is, right? That goes a big, big way. But then the other thing you need to look at is your component availability. Are the components on the machine customized components that you have to go back to the manufacturer for? Or are they standard off the shelf components that you can go to the local Granger, McMaster, or industrial supply house and get that contactor, get that PLC, get that drive? right? Those are all critical questions to ask. And just like, having enough technicians to put one on site within an hour of every single customer out there being down, no one's carrying 100% of the spare parts in inventory either,
Right.
right? You have a certain amount of parts that you try to carry and you try to supplement everything else as best you can. It's just a reality. And anyone that says otherwise, frankly, they're just not being forthcoming and honest with the situation, right? So that part availability outside of the vendor is crucial. And if you're opening those electrical cabinets and you're seeing an additional digit put at the end of the model number on a contactor, or you're seeing brands that you don't recognize or that are in a foreign language, right? That's a big flag. That's a big red flag.
Yeah. So I know that a lot of these machines do come in from Europe, right?
Mm-hmm.
That those brands are over there. So how are they ensuring that those parts are standard and available in the US or Canada?
It's really that's really dependent on the belief system that the manufacturer holds in terms of supporting the product. They're going to do one of two things. They're either going to try to design and engineer a product that has readily available parts and can easily be supported, or they're going to try to design and engineer a product that forces you to go back to them to buy parts. Right? It's going to be one or the other, and it's really just gets back to a philosophy of that manufacturer. And I've seen both over the years. In the early days, when CNC technology was first coming out, it was very, very common to have small little manufacturers that made this control or this processor board or this PLC, right? That 5 years later, they were no longer in business because they couldn't compete against the ABBs, the B&Rs, right? Some of the bigger manufacturers in the world, Siemens, and they were gone. And then anyone that bought those machines were frankly, they were in a fix. If one of those parts failed, they were out of business on that machine tool.
Yeah,
Most
wow.
of the major brands that are out there, right, don't do that. They have more known componentry in their machines, but are those parts needing to be programmed by the factory before they can be installed? Can I get this part off the shelf? Can you log into my machine and remotely flash a PLC if it goes bad, remotely load the software if it gets corrupt, right? What do I need to go back to that factory for in terms of support on this product? And again, the more and more automation that's involved, the more and more critical that answer is, right? Those
Yeah.
machines have to stay up and running.
So how does that go into the decision, like when metal forming is deciding what manufacturers to represent or offer? How do you determine that? What are the things that you're looking at?
Well, typically we, spend a lot of time with the manufacturer, right? There's a number of people here that have a incredibly high level of technical ability and skill and years of experience. Um, you go to the manufacturer, you open up the cabinets, you take a look at the componentry, and you have the discussion, and you have the hard discussion, and you put it to them, and you hold them to it, right? You have to hold them to it. Most of the globally, I don't want to put this so it makes sense. Most of the big companies that globally provide machine tools that have been around for a number of years, they're not just some startup company that, opened its doors 5, 6, 7 years ago. Most of those companies are pretty good at using common product, right? There a lot of them are off the shelf components. It would have to be on a case by case basis in terms of looking in the cabinets. But the technology behind those components, right? Those are questions that you can just straight out answer. And you can learn a lot by seeing what kind of diagnostic capabilities that these companies have from a remote stance. Usually, the higher level of remote diagnostics, the more in tune that company is to being able to support their customers at a higher level, right? Because they want to provide that type of support. Those types of things should typically be free of charge. It should be part of the way the machine tool is built, right? So we spend a lot of time analyzing what are the parts on the machines? Are they major components that you can find anywhere? Is any of it customized? Do the drives and the frequency inverters and other things, do they need to be, programmed by the factory, or does the machine program it on startup? Things of that nature. Who writes the software for the machine? Is the software that drives everything written by a third party, or is it controlled and written by the manufacturer of the machine tool themselves?
Yeah.
Right? Those are all very, very valid questions to ask. And you try to go through that entire litany of everything. and make sure and talk to customers that are using it in Europe. And most of the major brands know other major brands. So interfacing with the vendors you're currently using to ask them about this company, right,
Right.
can also often be a wealth of information, right? Everyone talks. This is a small industry. Everyone knows each other,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they really do. So you just need to ask and make sure you're asking the right questions and you get answers. You don't get brushed up. Yeah, no problem. We can do that. Right. Well, that's not an answer. Like, how do you do it?
Right.
Right. And then, frankly, what do you do when you don't? We
Yeah.
sell very highly our remote service and support capabilities, but what happens if you can't? What happens if it doesn't work? Right. So
All good questions.
that's
Yeah.
a big topic.
Yeah, yeah. And as a contractor, I have to trust you, that you have done that vetting and that you have
Correct.
asked those questions and then you can communicate that to me. Because if you've
Correct.
never really been involved in this before, you just don't know what to ask. You don't know what
Right.
to expect. You've never had
Correct.
one before. Now, this, you may not be able to answer this, but I'm curious, like most roofing contractors, is there a type of machine that most get started with that's probably semi-automated? Like you see, what are they? And it's hard to say because there's so many different kinds of contractors out there doing so many different things. But is there
Right.
that entry level model that
Yeah.
is a good fit for most?
Almost, and I won't say all of them, but I got to believe that 99.9% of them have all started with a standard 16 gauge by 10-foot folder and shear. That is the combo package. That is the most common and most popularly sold combo package out there. And with that, you can make virtually any roofing profile or flashing or trim piece that you would ever need to make. So
Yeah.
that would, and again, the entry point, the barrier to start that, frankly, from a financial stance, is probably the lowest entry point from a financial stance into manufacturing there is. And
Yeah.
it's desperately needed. I mean, there are so many needs out there to have these local roofing shops being able to bend up trim and provide trim. I mean, you go in every time out there, and there's how many roofing shops? I think the last time we did a survey, there was close to 40,000 roofing companies across North America. Not all
Wow.
of them bend trim, right? But it's an enormous amount. There's not a town that exists that doesn't have a roofing shop in it somewhere,
Right.
right? So it's, do you want to farm that out and pay someone else their margin? Do you have enough that you're buying that you can justify the purchase of your own sheet metal bending and shearing solution? Can you front the cash to have the material in house, right?
Hmm.
And the stock and inventory of that material, because that is a big investment that's sitting on the floor until you need to use it, right? So there's a lot that goes into that. It's frankly not as simple as I'm making it sound. You go out and buy a little folder and a shear and you're in business, but it's not far from it,
Right.
right?
Now, I was talking to a contractor in, I think it was June, when we were at the Florida Roofing Expo,
Mm-hmm.
and he is a roofing contractor, has a sheet metal shop, and he
Yep.
told me he sells more to HVAC contractors
Yeah,
than
that could
he
be.
does and uses in his own business. So this
Mm-hmm.
could present an opportunity for a contractor to really diversify and expand with their sheet metal offerings.
It absolutely could. Now that would be a slightly different machine. Typically HVAC, right? Heating, ventilation, air conditioning, requires segmented tooling with a height to it for being able to make four-sided parts, being able to create male and female sides of ducting and things of that nature. And it also really depends on what region that person is in, because there's a lot of areas that allow for the coiled duct systems where it's not really sheet metal made.
Right.
It's that real flexible coil stuff that they can put out there.
Mhm.
Most of the Midwestern areas, especially in the bigger cities, they still have all the union requirements for having steel put into the ducts, particularly in homes and some of the high rises and things. And then you're starting to get more into mechanical contracting.
Yeah.
But there's certainly a lot of folders that are sold into that arena. Um, that individual was probably a more unique individual, and I don't know what town they were in, but possibly in one small enough where he didn't have competition with other people making HVAC product. But the tools that are used in HVAC
Are
versus
different.
architecture are pretty different. Yeah.
Okay. Just curious, yeah, because I
Yep.
wondered how common that was, or if we would be seeing more of that. Just, diversification is always great to be able to do different things. I want to talk a little
Well,
bit.
I'm sorry, Karen, but the
Oh, go ahead.
bigger diversification side on the architectural side is getting into the ornamental architectural work. That
Okay.
sector of the industry is growing very, very rapidly. And we're dealing with more and more customers that are, these architects are designing these incredibly fancy and ornate building exteriors. And then someone has to make that stuff.
Yeah.
And the architecture has no idea what goes into manufacturing some of the panels and cornice work and some of the other things that they want to put outside of buildings. And we see regularly now just these crazy drawings that someone came up with that requires very, very advanced bending equipment in order to be able to produce. So that would be more directly related from a roofing side and an architectural side,
Got
right?
it.
Getting into that type of the area. And, you get up into some of the big old cities like New York, right? Probably Philadelphia, some of the others. And there's big business in trying to recreate some of those old historic buildings, trim pieces and everything.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that's a very, very high level of craftsmanship that was required to make that originally. Those craftsmen have all retired. Their kids
Yeah.
probably didn't go into it, right? So they need machine tools in order to replicate a lot of those profiles and shapes.
Yeah, yeah, didn't think about that. But yeah, the architect, whether they're replicating something that was previously, installed by a true craftsman, how many hundreds of years ago, or
Mm-hmm.
designing something new, the architect's probably not thinking, I don't know how they're going to make that, but this is what I want it to look like, right?
Nope. They don't care how it made and they don't care what it costs, right? They just want it to look like what they put. Hey, paper has never refused ink, right?
Yeah.
So they draw it out and let someone else deal with it. So
That's funny. Yeah. So what I was going to ask earlier is I just want to talk about, I've been to some of the industry shows. We have MetalCon coming up
mhm.
here in next week,
Yeah,
actually. Oh
next
my
week.
gosh. Yeah, we're
Yep.
heading out Monday. Um,
It's on us.
a little intimidating when you're seeing these machines and seeing this computer screen and there's all these controls and just talk a little bit about the learning curve for an operator to understand, because people get intimidated by a Windows laptop computer, right? So
Right.
having a big expensive machine, that can be a little scary. What if I hit the wrong button?
Right. Yeah. Well, you can't failure proof anything,
Right.
right? I mean, a simple pencil you can jab your finger with, right? So
Yeah.
so no matter what you do, right, things can go sideways. Um, Most of the controls that are out there today are very graphic in nature, so that you can actually visualize what's going on. One of the challenges, which is probably a distinct difference between the precision side of the industry, the durable goods industry, and the architectural side, is determining that bend sequence. A lot of these crazy profiles we see, it's very challenging to come up with a bend sequence that actually functions. And various controls have various abilities to automatically determine those. I've never seen a control that can automatically determine all of them. Typically, somewhere along the line, someone's going to have to get involved in saying, hey, this is the order of bend in order to make this cornice, this gutter, this whatever it may be, right? Um, the programming side is actually pretty simple because of the graphic interface. Most people that are comfortable using an iPhone or a Google phone or whatever, right, where they're dealing with graphical stuff and going in between apps and
Right.
everything, can pretty quickly pick up, right, how to program the parts and how to process them into a finished piece. It's the bending sequence where you need to have a little bit more of a 3D kind of mind about you to really
Hmm.
visualize how that part's going to fit around the machine. Now, with the graphical side, right, you can try this bending sequence, step it through visually and see whether that works. No, it doesn't. Let's move these two bends around and keep going. But that takes time. So now you get into a situation, you have two or three of these folders, right? Two of them are being run by 18-year-olds that have never seen a piece of sheet metal in their lives, and you're just trying to convince them to wear gloves so they don't get cut. Then you can go offline and start programming, where you've got an expert that can do this in their sleep, provide the programs for those machines to run the profiles. And then you've changed that operator to more of a material handler that just
Right.
kind of has to follow the steps on that screen. And as more and more of these companies are getting into CAD profiles and things like that, the ability to import the shape you want to bend into the control and then have someone with that experience. maybe, and you hate to say this, ageism, right, is very challenging, but maybe you've got someone that can bend this stuff in their sleep, but their back and arms and shoulders just can't do the physicality, the physical part of the bending
Right.
anymore, right? But they can certainly program these parts out where the young bucks can come in and they have no problem flinging that sheet around and making those bends take place. So, it's experience, right? Once they get in front of these machines and start seeing it, and here's the other thing, which kind of befuddles me a little bit. There isn't a better industry for someone to go into that isn't college bound than manufacturing.
Yeah.
You can make a very, very comfortable living, right, in the manufacturing industry if you're willing to work, right, and you want to get out there and you want to, create a career for yourself. And you don't need to go through 2 or 4 years of college education and end up, leaving with $100,000 or more of debt
Yeah.
and trying to get a job with Greek mythology as your major, right? And not understanding why no one will hire you. It's, and Mike Rowe and some of the others talk about this a lot, right? There is such a need for people to get into the manufacturing trades right now. And if you get in, if you put the time on the front end to learn that trade, to master it, you can take it as far as you want to go. Maybe you work at a company for 4 or 5 years and no one yell at me for saying this, and then you want to launch off and start your own,
Mhm.
right? Well, what's more American entrepreneurial than that, right? Or you start a division up or something like that. It's one of the few industries that you really have the ability to cut your own course as a career path and determine your future versus having someone else do it for you. And coming out of high school and straight into it, or maybe a couple of years in a technical college where you've taken some sheet metal classes,
Mhm.
I mean, you're working, you're making good money right out of the gate,
Yeah.
right? And the training aspect of it, the enhanced training, being able to remotely hop on that machine and work with a new operator and talk them through how do you figure out the bending sequence of this part, right?
Mhm.
All of those should be readily available from anybody somebody would want to, start doing business with, right?
Right.
So there's a number of different things that can be put in place that can really assist that operator in terms of getting up and running much, much faster. We do oftentimes, we'll do, not as a plug for metal forming, but heck, I'm here, I might as well. We'll
Yeah.
oftentimes have training sessions here down in Peachtree City where companies will send multiple operators, new people. They come in, they need to learn how to run the machine, program the machine, work with them on different profiles, right? How to safely operate the machine, which is a big, big deal, especially with new operators where they're not thinking,
Right.
right? They've got to be, safe. So we'll oftentimes have classes down here where we'll have people come down and partake and get further education. So,
Yeah, yeah, I know. I think I did a whole other hour webinar with Chad Rowe just about
mm-hmm.
safety
Yeah,
with the machines
it's a
and
big
light
deal.
curtains and all
Mm-hmm.
the stuff that's in place. But yeah, you like you said, they're just not thinking, it manufacturing, it can be lucrative, it can be a great career, it can also be dangerous. So
It
you've
can be
got to have that
dangerous.
safety. Yeah,
Yep. Well, you have
definitely.
when you're standing in front of one of these folders or any machine and you're doing a repetitive task, you can only pay attention to so much for so long.
Right.
And one of the biggest things you got to pay attention to is where are your fingers,
Mm,
right? And when you're moving a sheet around trying to hit gauge points, you got your fingers right up next to the bend because you've got a small little profile you're making, right? An F and J or something like that. You have to be aware, right? And that's where a lot of these higher, more technologically advanced safety systems come in, where they can
hmm
truly protect that operator and keep them out of harm's way. And as less and less skilled people are being put on these machines, that becomes more and more important, right? And how do you introduce someone to this machine with safety without giving up 50% of your productive time because it slows everything down so much, right?
Yeah.
There's a multitude of different safety systems out there, and those too need to very, very much be investigated because, frankly, as litigious as this,
Oof.
world is that we live in, you have to protect your operators. If not,
Yeah.
and someone gets hurt, it comes right back on you. I mean,
Yeah.
it truly does. And try to explain why you didn't buy a machine with a light curtain. It's really,
Yeah.
really hard to do in a court of law if someone decides to take it that far. And
Yeah.
it's, the reality we live in, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. Safety is definitely an important part of the
Mm-hmm.
conversation. Yeah. So I'm curious. This has been, first of all, this has been a great conversation, very educational, informational. I really hope those who are here, are taking nuggets of information away. And for those who watch on demand, that, you're able to learn something about this for your business. But I want to know, what's the future hold? What's coming? Are you rolling anything new out at MetalCon?
So the biggest thing that the future really holds is more and more advancements towards automation, right? And the biggest thing that I see coming up is more automation at a lower cost point of entry. Right now, true automation is fairly expensive, right? And it's fairly challenging for a lot of companies because not only do you need to deal with the machine, you need to deal with programming the automation side of it. So as AI, right, which is exploding right now, as we all
Yeah.
know, everything's AI. You can't say anything without it being recorded and transposed in AI and telling you what you should have said or what you should be thinking about what was
Yep.
said. That will go a long way towards easing that burden, where it will be able to start analyzing things at a higher level and start really reducing that interface that a operator, right, or a manager or production foreman needs to have within that machine. So as you know, everyone says the more technology sold, the price should go down. That's not
Mhm.
necessarily the case, right? As more technology is sold and advances in technology make it more capable, price typically continues to go up, and we've all experienced the price increases that we've had. But then you should hit a point where you start being able to provide lower end technology that may not be able to do 100% of what you want, but can do 80% of what you want. And at that 80%, you have a price point that's no longer a barrier for entry. And those are the things that I think we're going to see coming around the corner very, very quickly, where we'll be able to take a machine that has an operator standing in front of it, bending 10-foot sticks of trim, right, and be able to put a cobot in front of it where the operator will assist, right, but it will do 80% of that work as opposed to the operator having to do it all. And those are
Yeah.
the things that are really, that are really coming around the corner. The problem, not to bash MetalCon or any of these other shows, is oftentimes the setup time isn't long enough to really install some of the automation. We've been wanting to put one of
Right.
the big Yorns automated systems in our booth for a long time, but we simply don't
Yeah.
have the time allocation for setting up that allows us to do that. So
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. But that is why you have a showroom, right?
that's why we have a showroom, correct? That is
Because
correct.
you control that setup time. It's permanent there, and
Yep.
your showroom's open, as most
Mm-hmm.
people who are selling these solutions, because like you said earlier, it could be a $500,000 check or a $2 million check. It just
That's right.
depends on what your needs are. So you
Correct.
wouldn't buy a car. Well, actually, I was going to say you wouldn't buy a car without test driving it, but people do now, right?
People do.
Online. It
Yep.
shows up at their door. So,
It
man,
shows up, it's dropped off of a flatbed and they write a check and they drive away with it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So
Yep.
I've got to come up with a new analogy for that. I'm not
Right.
sure what that is. But yeah,
Yep.
so first of all, like I said, great conversation, great education, which is really part of the whole process, as you said. And I, admire how you guys are doing this and the conversations that you have. So for those who are ready to dip their toe in the water, what are your recommendations?
One, I'd look at everyone, right? And even if you're not dipping your toe in the water, but you've already got equipment in place, look at the competition. Because it's going to do one of two things. It's either going to solidify the fact you made the right decision the first time and you'll continue down that path, or you might see something that's better and more interesting, right? And a better fit for what you want to do, and then you change. Either way, you're going to have a better outcome by looking at everyone. And one of the interesting things is all of the major folder guys are down here in Peachtree City. So
Yeah.
one trip you can come, you can see us all, right? You can
Yeah.
come down, spend a couple days, make sure everyone takes you out to a nice dinner, right? And see all of them and compare them, right?
Hmm.
And don't just compare them from a visual stance. Make sure the covers come off. Talk about the things we've discussed. Talk about parts availability, about customized parts, about off the shelf componentry. How does a remote service work? Really delve into it, right?
Hmm.
When we on the, I keep referencing the precision side, right? On the big durable
Hmm.
goods side of sales, we'll bring customers in and we'll spend a day and a half, 2 days with them down here. When they're making a decision to buy a $2.7 million automated folding system, it's a lot of money. we get calloused by it. We throw away around $100,000 purchases like it's nothing. That's a
Right.
lot of money,
Yeah.
right? And just because you bought brand X doesn't mean you should continue to. Look at the
Yeah.
others, talk to the others, see what they're offering, see what they have to provide, right? There's a number of good brands out there. Frankly, I'm a little bit, gonna tout our own brands, right, as being some of the
Of
best
course.
out there. But
Of course.
everyone should look at everything, right? Because we're
Yeah.
not the best suit for every single person out there.
Right.
Everyone's got a different body type, and they need to have a different fit,
Yeah.
right? So one, I would go out and I would see everyone. I would talk to them all. I'd get a clear cut understanding in terms of what they're doing, and regardless of what you're buying now. And this may, get a little bit of foul looks from those here at Metal Forming that telling customers that buy from us to go look elsewhere too. But do it. Look at what's out there,
Yeah.
right? This is a big pie. This is a big pie. You need to make sure that you're getting the best solution for what your current needs are. And those needs
Yeah.
change from when you first bought that product.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Wow. And when you said Peachtree City, I just want to clarify that's Georgia. So
Georgia, we're
if
south of the
anybody's,
airport
yep.
about 35 minutes. Yep.
Yeah. So easy to get to,
Easy.
a major Atlanta airport. So
Biggest in the
yeah,
world.
great advice. Great advice, David. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to just turn our PowerPoint slide back on. There you are, your happy face, and say thank you to you and to Metal Forming for making this conversation possible and for bringing this information to everybody out there in the industry. And if you are going to Metal Forming next or Metal Con next week, swing by the Metal Forming booth and say hi to the
Please
team
do.
there and see
Stop
what's
by and
new.
say hello.
Yeah, so thank you all for being here for this Coffee Conversations. We've got another one coming up in November. I don't have the date off the top of my head, but we'll be sending you an email about it. It's going to be with our friends from the Metal Roofing Alliance. We're going to be talking about some of the severe weather that's been happening lately and have some contractors on board to talk about how they've been handling it. So thank you again for tuning in today. We are so glad you're here, and we hope to see you on a future episode of Coffee Conversations. Thanks again, David. Bye.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks, everyone.